All right, so welcome to a special live version of the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. Today, we're going to dive into the inspiring story of a Midwest pharmacist and his wife who successfully navigated the world of real estate. Our co-host, Joe, also known as Husker RX, is a pharmacist with a passion for investing. He acquired 18 single-family homes from 2010 to 2020 while working full-time and raising a family of 4. What sets this story apart is that he now resides 2 hours away from his real estate portfolio. In this podcast, we'll explore how he built his portfolio locally and then moved away from it after 7 years. His story will dive into how he utilized technology, built valuable relationships, and employed creative solutions to effectively manage his remote real estate investments. With a track record of only about 12 weeks of vacancy out of over 2,000 rentable months, his journey offers practical insights into achieving success through determination, innovation, and smart management in the world of real estate. Join us as we uncover the strategies and challenges that contributed to his success and learn how he continues to excel as a remote real estate manager. Whether you're an aspiring real estate investor or simply interested in effective property management from a distance, this interview will provide you with valuable insights and strategies to enhance your approach. So with that said, Joe, I'm excited to have this conversation with you. We've been messaging quite a bit here on X. You have an amazing story and you've done it quietly, but now it's time to tell your story so other people can learn more about you. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and we'll get started.
Yeah, Aaron, thanks for having me. Yeah, my name's Joe. I've been investing in real estate now for about 15 years. Prior to that, I had no real desire to invest in real estate. I actually bought a home in 2006, built a home in 2006 and got caught in that downtrend of real estate. I was not real keen on real estate or buying homes because I lost quite a bit in that during that time period. But I met my wife in 2007, 2008. We ended up getting married around 2011. Prior to that, we bought a townhome in Omaha, Nebraska, about half of a townhome, not the whole thing. And we had lived there for 2 years. It was in a centrally located portion of Omaha, and we started thinking about having a family, and the townhome just wasn't set up real well. Busy street, small backyard, typical wants that you want as your family expands. And so we decided at that point that we were needing to either maybe sell the townhome or rent the townhome. And my wife looked at the numbers and thought that she's an accountant and this could actually be a decent rental. And because at that time, our payments were much lower than what we would be bringing in per month with the townhome. So that was our first rental, and we started it and rented it for probably about 2 years. And it was working real well. And so we reached out to our real estate agent who had always sold us our primary home. And we were asking him about potentially buying more rentals and what his thoughts were. And he didn't provide me much feedback. So I started exploring on my own. And I had found this 1960s home, more in central Omaha. It was in between some colleges, near a golf course. But it was a nice home. It wasn't air-flowing, 3-bed, 2-bath, 2-car garage. It was built in the 1960s, so it had a few different layout. But he wasn't giving me the response I wanted, so I had to leave that real estate agent. I reached out to a different one that had advertised really well on finding rental homes in the Omaha area. So I called him, and he informed me that, no, Joe, you don't want to buy a 1960s home. You want to go for like the suburban areas, the newer homes, and go that route because the maintenance is much less. The tenants that you attract are much higher quality, and it'll be much easier to do this while you and your wife have W-2s. He took us to a few that he thought would work, and we ended up buying one. At that time, this was probably 2013. At that time, the main target we were trying to hit was the 1%, like 1% rent was equal to the purchase price. And that worked. We found one and got a cash flow, or immediately cash flows. I know times are different now, and we can get into that later. But we did that about 3 or 4 times. During that time, we went to our local lender and found out that you can get 30-year traditional financing through a program with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac that allows you to buy 1 to 4 unit real estate. It was at about a 0.5% higher than what the current long-term primary home rates were. As we were doing this, they allow you to do up to 10 homes per individual. When we started, my wife and I would both put our names on the loans. And we did that until we got to about 8 or 9 homes. And that we'll fast forward now to, it was right around 2018, 2019. And we were looking at the refinance rates and the rates that we had locked in back in 2013, 14, and 15 on these 9 homes. And we thought it was a good time to refinance the whole 9 and take that and buy as many as we could. For one, it would separate my wife and I's names on the loan so we could potentially expand our 10 into 20. So we did that, and we were able to expand that. And that was the last 2019, beginning of 2020 was the last purchase we made based upon the old metric we used. So that was our story as far as how we acquired these. Some of the unique things maybe that I can get into about how we found these or what certain parameters or aspects we were looking at. I'm not sure if that's what you want to go into.
Sure. So let's pause for a second. And there's a few things I want to unpack from what you just told us. You started in a similar fashion to what I would say a lot of people do, right? Like you had this townhome and you gamed it out as to whether or not it would be a viable rental. And I don't want to say it was an accident because you obviously thought it through, but you didn't have this grand vision that, hey, we're going to buy 18 rentals when you bought your first one. Is that correct?
We had really thought about diversification. 10 years prior to that, I invested in 401ks, pretty passive stuff. And it really always got at me that I'd rather be in control of something. Might be just my personality. But after we did that first and second and third one, you get that entrepreneurial feeling. And it's not really like you're being an entrepreneur because it's just financing and managing the personalities that you put in the home. But yeah, it definitely led to what we continued to do.
I want to challenge you there a little bit, though, because I think it's exactly like being an entrepreneur. It's just not the Silicon Valley TV version of what people think of as entrepreneurs. You're operating a business. It's a real breathing, living entity. You have cash flow coming in. You have expenses going out. You have, in your case, and part of what I want to talk about with you, in your case, you occupy most of the roles that many people delegate. So you self-manage. It sounds like from some of the exchanges I have with you, you even handle stuff like your own taxes, which you described yourself, I forget exactly how you said it, but you said someone who typically trusts yourself to do certain jobs more than you trust other people. Sounds like you had that kind of experience when you were working with your first agent, like they weren't getting you quick responses or they weren't getting you holistic information that you were looking for. So
Right.
Not only did you have the entrepreneurial drive to try this out on your own, but you had the courage, if you will, to expand at scale, something that typically takes a lot of bandwidth while working full-time. My understanding is your wife was working full-time, and I don't think you mentioned it yet, but you currently have 4 kids under the age of 11, which means that you were raising young kids throughout this entire acquisition process. So how did you come to the decision that you wanted to take all of those responsibilities on your own while also managing your career and your family?
So I think it goes back to a little bit about how you go into real estate. I do have a little bit, not like an extensive background in like construction. I'm handy. I'm able to paint walls, fix toilet issues and that sort of thing. So yeah, we decided to take that on mainly because it was working. It was working and we could see 10 to 20 years out that if we would continue to do this and keep adding to the portfolio, that there could be a time that, one, we have the flexibility to just let the cash flow keep working. 2, when you have single family homes, you can sell one off if maybe your spouse decides not to work, or maybe you don't want to work for a year, or you just need the money to do something that one of your kids wants to go do. You don't have to sell out the whole portfolio. You can sell out one at a time. Again, you're back into control of multiple assets. You're able to do that more easily. Getting back to as far as handling raising kids and doing that, when the kids are young, it really wasn't too bad. Like when they were infants, if we needed to go paint a place or fix a place, they would sleep and we'd do it. when they'd need attention, and we would stop. And as they got a little bit older, they usually had a lot of fun running around the homes that we were in while we were trying to accomplish some of the work that needed to be done. But for the most part, I always bought off the MLS, and this mainly was because I knew that house would be ready to go day one. In fact, sometimes my realtor, when we do our final walkthrough, I would have tenant showings at the same time so that it would be rented like the day that I closed the paperwork. So,
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. So in the intro, we talked about how you had only 12 weeks of vacancy out of over 2,000 rentable months since you've owned this portfolio. So you just mentioned one way, which is basically that you're already advertising and doing walkthroughs basically right as you close. But what are some other ways that you've held such a tight vacancy percentage?
So the other way is, so again, going back to the type of home, they're highly desirable homes, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage attached in suburban areas that have good schools. All my leases have 60-day notices in them. As soon as 60-day notice is received, I start advertising the home on Zillow, and I'll compensate the current tenant $50 to $100 a showing if they show the home. And that helps the next tenant figure out what kind of landlord a person is and how they treat the home and will they respond to different needs that are needed. So yeah.
That's fair. So much of real estate investing is simpler than people think. Simple, but not easy. You do have to deal with a lot of stuff, which I want to get into that in a couple minutes, because I think some of what would benefit the listeners the most is just hearing some of the stories you've had. But it really is just about being diligent, setting up good processes. It doesn't have to be over-engineered. It's simple stuff. Like you said, 60-day notice. That's a prompt. That's enough lead time for you to get ahead of what could be a problem, like vacancy. Having clear communication with tenants about things like repairs, and maintenance. But before we get into the tenant stories, I want to ask you, so you mentioned one important nuance that I think most people probably don't know, but I think is really important, which is about traditional loans and how there's a limit to the number of traditional conventional loans that you can have under each person's name. And so you mentioned this. I know I've learned the same lesson the hard way, but usually a husband and a wife, when they're buying homes, whether it's a personal home or a rental home, they put both of their names on the loan. And one thing that can do, which you usually don't realize until later, is that there's a limit of 10 loans per person. If both of you are on the loan, you're using up both of your limits at the same time. So I think what Joe is explaining to the audience here is that you actually did something really smart, which is once you learned that, I think you said in around 2015, you refinanced out of pulled cash out of your original portfolio and then redid the loans under your individual names so that you could basically double the amount of conventional loans you could hold. So just simplify that even further, right? That what investors can remember from this is that if you plan to potentially buy more than 10 rentals, having the loans in an individual spouse's name will allow you to double the amount of rentals you can buy with conventional loans. So that's, I think, a really important takeaway. It's something that most people don't realize until it's too late. Do you have anything else to say on financing?
I just say other caveats are that the bank will take projected rental income as income on those loans. So let's say, your W-2 may not get you right exactly where you need to get financing. They can include potential rental income for the prospective property that you're buying.
Yeah, that's an important one too, right? A lot of people say, how am I going to possibly qualify for these loans? But what happens is usually, especially if it's being used as a rental property, they can do a comparative market analysis, usually part of the appraisal process, where the appraiser will look up what they think it can rent for, and then they'll be able to count that towards the income that you can use to qualify for the loan, versus them trying to judge you as an individual or you as a household. Can you cover 20 mortgages? It's not just you, it's you plus all the rental income you would be bringing in. That's a good point.
The other thing is do your taxes right. Like my banker said, a lot of people that buy real estate, they come in here and they show a loss on their taxes. And that may be a good thing for you as an individual not having to pay taxes when you go to get loan and financing. it doesn't work so well if you're wanting to expand. So yeah, just make sure that your properties can, cash flow, and it'd be nice if they can exceed depreciation too.
Yeah, most people don't want to invest to lose money. So there's a kind of perfect balancing act in real estate, especially in the early years of a loan, where you can usually get completely tax deferred cash flow, where the interest payments on your mortgage and the depreciation are greater and the expenses are greater than the income you're bringing in. But you still have in actuality, you still have positive cash flow, but the write-offs make it so that it's a loss on paper. That is usually an advantage, right? But it can also work against you if you have too much of a loss on paper, because then the lenders are going to basically treat it as an asset that you're losing money on. So there's definitely a balancing act, and taxes are not something to take lightly. So that's the more dry side of real estate investing. As you built this portfolio, because it sounds like it happened in waves, what did you do to handle the volume? So the way I think of it is that for every house, you have appliances, you have a roof, you have potential CapEx events, big expenses that pop up. You have more people to deal with. You have more rent to collect. Every new house, even though it's more income for you and incredible investments for your future, it's also more potential headaches. And with that comes, you have to have some sort of system to handle all that volume. So what did you do to build something that you could scale with, especially given all the other things you had going on in your life?
So up until about 8, I was using binders with paper, and that's how I'd write my expenses. I'd have people doing Venmo, PayPal, sending me a check. And when we hit 8 or 9, my wife was like, we need to streamline this and figure out a better way to do this if we're going to double this. So at that point, she did a bunch of research and found the software called Buildium, and we've used that ever since, and it has been a lifesaver. I think it's $500 to $600 a year, along with the fees that come along with some of the other services it provides. But yeah, it's streamlined everything. Does our leasing docs with DocuSign. They're all standardized. Pets, no pets. There's different avenues that it'll send to the potential tenant. It does the maintenance requests. It allows me to send out reminders for HVAC, filters, freezing faucets as far as turning them off in the winter, underground sprinkler maintenance, all that. And then it allows the tenant on their end to pay rent, and it all comes in it through one avenue with nothing outside the system. And on top of that, it organizes all of the finances.
And you do your own taxes, correct?
Yep.
On 18 rentals, including all the depreciation and all the capitalization and all that stuff?
Yeah, as soon as you put, I use TurboTax, and as soon as you put that stuff in the initial year, like TurboTax carries it on for the rest of its life until you delete it out of the system or you sell it. And then the Buildium software, it line items all the expenses. So it becomes real easy just to take cleaning and maintenance, put it into TurboTax, advertising, put it into TurboTax, and it breaks it down for each property. So it really wasn't that difficult once it's set up.
So the idea is that you set it up correctly on the front end with the software. You build a profile for each one of your properties. You have the ability to do leasing, rent collection, and when expenses come through, you're itemizing them line by line as they come in. And then it integrates on the back end with your TurboTax so that you're doing your bookkeeping in real time. So it's not some giant mound of papers every April. Is that right?
Exactly. Like we can tell you exactly, my wife has it built to where we can see exactly where we're at on the amount of equity going back into our loans. So we know exactly where we're at with the year, if that makes sense. And then you can tag things as like a capital expense so that at the end of the year, I'll know that put that under the capital expense versus regular maintenance costs.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned a couple of times now, it sounds like you and your wife have some division of responsibility for managing. Have you guys always worked hand in hand on this, or you obviously self-manage, which means there's a lot of work to be spread around, but do you have specific roles that each other plays?
Yeah, for the most part, she does all the Buildu type accounting. Every month she'll go back through and make sure all the expenses are accounted for, check the credit card, check the bank account, make sure everything has been reconciled. And then as far as my duties, I pretty much do the leasing, the discussing with the handyman and HVAC and other services that are needed for the homes.
And it sounds like a good division. And there's like someone that's, so you're more forward or outward facing. So you're dealing with the tenants, you're dealing with the vendors, and then she's helping keep things organized and running smoothly on the back end. Is that right?
Yep.
Makes sense. A lot of people might hire a bookkeeper or outsource a lot of those tasks, but it sounds like what you've done is you've made great use. So you have your one expense. I think you said it's about $600 a year for the software, but you set it up in such a way that streamlines parts of the process that you would otherwise have to outsource. And then you two just divide the responsibilities in a way that sounds manageable. It's not like it's consuming your guys' lives or eating too much into your personal or professional or family time. And then you've just maintained a handle on your operations in a way that, yeah, like now you guys have almost 20 properties, but you're still running smooth. So that is no easy feat. But where I want to go next, which I think will be probably the most interesting to most, is you've had this almost a dozen years or more than a dozen years. You've been a real estate investor. You built this portfolio. You've managed it yourself. So far, what we've talked about is when everything's running smooth. And it's already a tall task to operate a portfolio when things are running smooth. When things start to go wrong, it becomes a whole different game. So there are a couple of things I'm gonna read off from some of the chats that you and I had before this. And you said the only damage story you had came from a tenant that had an 800 credit score. You said you once got a call from a tenant where they said that you probably saw this on the news already, but there was a hostage situation in one of your rentals. You said you bought a house where the fireplace had a bullet hole in the gas line. There's some pretty colorful stories, and I'm sure that's only scratching the surface. So I'd love for you to just share a few instances of times when things have gone wrong and then how you dealt with it.
Yeah, like those three are probably the most interesting. Our second rental, we had rented to, I look at credit, and credit really, when you're a remote landlord, credit for the most part will tell you exactly how things are going to go with who you have in that house. And the one thing about higher credit people is that they do inform you when there's problems, which is probably one of the biggest things you need to have as a remote landlord. Because if there's problems, it's not that I don't want to address it. It's just recognizing that. But so, yeah, that tenant that you were talking about, we had leased to a couple. One of the two didn't have a driver's license, but the wife had a driver's license, good job, bad credit. The boyfriend had good credit, no driver's license. And so they were in the house for about 16, 17 months. And then, yeah, one day I got a call from her. And she was like, "Oh, you probably saw what happened on the news." And my wife had said that she had seen a notification from the local news station that there was a hostage situation in Northwest Omaha, and didn't think anything of it. But so then I got to talking with her, and she's like, "Yeah, my boyfriend held me hostage, and then the cops were here. Crossbow went through. He tried to shoot me with a crossbow. It went through the wall. I tried to get into the garage and unfortunately back through your garage door." It's not funny, but she luckily got out and everybody was safe. And the boyfriend ended up spending some time in the state penitentiary. He might even still be there, but yeah. And she ended up fixing everything and back to the way it was. And she's now not in the house anymore. She's moved on. But yeah, that was probably one of the most exciting ones. And that was our second house that we had ever rented. And that didn't stop us.
Wait, so that was only the second house? So you didn't have your full portfolio yet?
No, that was the second one. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so before you get to another story, let's talk about that. When most people are faced with a situation like that would cause them to give up or say, this isn't worth it, or it's too risky. I like when things are running smooth, but when things start to go bad, it just becomes a pain in the ass. Was it just that you guys have the correct composure to deal with stuff like this? Or like, what would you say you credit to the fact that you guys continued on after going through something like that?
When you self-manage, you really get to know the individuals, and I knew that she was an honest person and gonna probably get things back the way they were, and so there's a little less separation when you're self-managing and not having a third party do it, where you might get information secondhand, and it might actually be harder to hear it secondhand than it is just to deal with it directly.
Totally agree. I have a few instances in my experience so far where like having a property manager actually made it worse when something went wrong because I couldn't get firsthand information or really understand the issue. It was all being translated in a game of telephone. And then there was finger pointing, and then there was just a lot of issues that in hindsight, if I had been self-managing, probably wouldn't have happened because I would have had a greater, a closer finger on the pulse and a relationship and able to mediate and work through those issues. So that's a really good point. All right. So that was one story. I think I named 3 examples. How about some of the others?
Yeah, the bullet hole one was one that caught me off guard because we'd bought the home, nothing was on the disclosure. The tenant wanted the fireplace to work. I didn't know if it worked, and I didn't want to take the time to go troubleshoot it, so I called a local chimney person to go check it out. He got there, and he called me, and he said, "It looks like to me there was a gas line that went outside the home, and then it came back in where the fireplace was at." And he said, "It appears that there's a bullet hole in the gas line, so I'm not going to be able to do anything until that is fixed." And I was like, "A bullet hole?" And it caught me off guard. And I think I told him, just, don't tell the tenant quite yet. And so that, unfortunately, I shouldn't have said that because it caused some friction with that chimney guy because he didn't know that it was a rental I just bought. He thought I was trying to withhold something from the tenant that I knew. So after I bought it, I went on the internet and then Googled the address, and sure enough, there was a police report. That house did have some sort of domestic dispute in which a bullet was shot. And long story short, I ended up going back to my real estate agent and provided tons of exhibits, documentation about how the original homeowner knew about this, and he didn't put it on his disclosure, and provided a detailed plan for how much it would cost. And he ended up writing me a check, and we got it fixed. But yeah, that was that story.
Yeah. So it sounds like you caught it in time to address it, though.
Yeah, luckily the gas, didn't have an explosion or anything. That would have been really bad.
It's scary to think about all the kind of like guts inside of a house, right? There's water lines, there's gas lines, there's all sorts of wiring. And especially from a distance when you're buying properties and you don't get to see them and go inside the houses and look at all the little nuances. I think that's one of the most anxiety inducing parts of buying a house, even if it's in your backyard, but especially if it's far away, is just being able to trust. And then the disclosure, that's a good point too, right? Is technically by law, people are supposed to disclose if they know of an issue, but sometimes those things are wrong or potentially even misleading. And if you don't catch it and you don't find out about an issue for 5 months after closing, you're going to be in a messy situation to try and recoup any of the potential damage from that. So sounds like it's a good thing you caught it at the point that you did.
And going to your point about not knowing the internals of a home, so that was one strategy that I maybe haven't said anything about yet, is that in Omaha, there were 2 large companies that built starter homes from 1990 until one of them went bankrupt. The other one's still making or building homes. But I targeted those mainly because I knew that they all were built under the most recent code. Also, I could look at a picture on the MLS and I would know the floor plan of them inside because I'd been through each of the floor plans that the particular front of the house looked like. So I was able to dodge a lot of those problems about construction surprise based upon when you get into these neighborhoods where they build the cookie cutter homes. The one nice thing about them is that you do know that they all probably were built to a certain code. And for the most part, I think that codes from the early 90s to present have been good.
Yeah, you developed a mastery of, it sounds like you have a pretty specific buy box. You learned, like you said, some of the finer details so that you knew exactly what to look for. You weren't just picking random properties and hoping they cash flow. Like you had a much more developed idea of what you wanted to be operating and how you wanted to go about acquiring How did you develop those specs?
It was that realtor that I met, and towards the end there, I would just have him go walk through, and we'd make a purchase agreement to buy it, just because you get to the point that you can't really dwell on the small details. The carpet isn't the right color, or the walls aren't the right color, or the different things like that. The big things are the HVAC, the roof, and the appliances. If those are all relatively new or functioning, then it was a go. And it was if we would have wasted a lot more time running around looking at houses. And that's going back to having the family. It was difficult to get away to go look at houses, whereas we had this plan with a good realtor that we just targeted those and went with it.
Totally fair. Yeah. Having a realtor that really understands what you're looking for and can translate it back to you and ideally filter out stuff that doesn't fit that. It can save you a lot of time. And if you trust them as a negotiator, and they already are aligned with what you're trying to do, that's the type of relationship you want to build over the long run. And it sounds like, so how long have you been working with your current agent?
Probably 15 years.
Yes. Talk about something that's built to last. There's a ton of agents out there. Their span of expertise the range is very broad, right? There's some people that are really good at helping families find their dream home, but they don't know the first thing about investment properties. And then there's some that are more versatile. And then there's some that are really investor focused. And I think finding someone that you can build that long-term relationship with, and they know them, you trust each other, and they become a real extension of you in your acquisition process. That's the name of the game, especially if you've already got the management and stuff buttoned up. For long distance, I know you self-manage. I self-manage a good portion of my portfolio, but oftentimes newer investors that are looking to do long distance, they rely heavily on their property manager to help validate things like rent prices, condition of properties, et cetera. Would you say that your agent has a pretty good grasp over the rent values and they have a good eye for stuff like deferred maintenance and those type of issues?
Yeah, he had a good eye for walking through the house and making a list of things that he thought might need addressed or could be addressed. He wasn't the greatest at knowing rental pricing.
So where did you go to try and find more important numbers when you're trying to figure out what you can pay per property? Where did you go to find that information?
Yeah, Zillow is what I primarily used, and I would just see what was on the market. I would toggle between pets, no pets, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, and just price compare and see where you need to be at. And then it comes down to the lower price you go, the higher credit tenant you're going to get. It's dependent on what the house looks like, but you're going further out on the risk curve if you're pricing higher than the market, thinking you're going to get a tenant that is going to pay more than what the house will bring. So I tend to try to stay low as a remote landlord because it usually brings in less problems throughout the lifetime.
Now, in that context, when you say high and low, you're not talking about necessarily just high rent versus low rent. You're talking about relative to the market rent, right? So if you say you have a house that can rent for $1,500, you wouldn't want to come in and try and get $1,800 because you think that raises the risk profile of the type of tenant you would get. Did I understand that correctly?
Right. Like I may come in at $1,450, and that way I bring in anybody that's out there looking for a home is probably going to definitely send their app to me first, so we can talk about the house and their situation, and more than likely you're going to get the high credit, high income people to come that way. And what I've been doing lately, which is working, is if they get into the home and they feel that it's not exactly what they want, or not what they want. Say you got white appliances and they want stainless steel, is that I'll start negotiate where we're going from that particular rent rate. If I put stainless steel in here, that'll equate to $100 extra a month or something like that. And it seemed to be working lately, is to raise my rents a little bit.
Yeah, that's a neat trick. And so do you typically exclusively do 1-year leases, or do you ever do longer term?
Right now, I'm starting to do longer term just because I don't trust this market quite yet. And I want to lock in my good tenants at least for the next 24 months if they want to be here or be in my house.
Yeah, for sure. I know there's a lot of focus, generally speaking, on just trying to squeeze as close to market rent as possible. But I would much rather have a really high quality tenant that I have a relationship with and know and trust. Not only trust that they're going to pay rent on time, but trust that if there's an issue, they're going to communicate it to me, either an issue with the house or an issue that they're facing. I'd rather have that person in there for 24 months at a slightly below market rent than try and continue to churn and turn over and fill vacancies. Every time there's a vacancy, not only is it a loss of rent, but there's usually touch up and repairs and potential things that come up. I would much rather have someone in on a longer term basis than deal with all that extra stuff. Is that in line with your thinking too?
Yeah, the most expensive part of being a landlord is turnover. And it's mainly because the carpet won't typically need replaced if the person that is in there. But the new person that comes in, you may clean it and it may not be exactly what they envisioned, or that the walls may not be perfect. And it just makes for a happier relationship when they're happy when they're moving in.
Yeah. And so are you the one doing the walkthroughs on the move in and move out?
Again, being a remote landlord, I honestly haven't been to a lot of my homes in 4 to 5 years. And I know that may sound like bad, but it's just the way it's been. And we've had quite a bit of turnover. I rely on my handyman and my cleaners to tell me what doesn't look right. And then once the tenant moves in, I'll go through a punch list and pretty much do whatever it needs to be done to get it to where they need it to be.
So you have your guys go out there and scope things out, give you an idea of what needs to be done. And then you actually have the tenant move in, and then you go through that list with them, get everything up to an agreed upon standard, and you start from that baseline. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah. My leases state that when they sign that lease, like, they are taking the home as is, and anything that's not perfect, it really isn't my responsibility, but just to make things run smooth, I have no problem providing a handyman for a few days to fix anything that they feel is not up to what they need it to be.
On the front end at the beginning of the lease.
Yeah.
That's really smart. Yes. And they feel like they're bought into the initial move-in process, and they can take the time to look around and make sure that anything that needs to be addressed is addressed up front. And then if you haven't gone to your property in 4 or 5 years, you at least know that you're getting eyes on it from someone that you trust, and then also building that initial trust with the tenant on the condition of the property. That's really smart.
Yeah, and my handymen are very good too. I got 2 of them. That probably my biggest time killer with rentals is when my handyman calls and he just wants to talk for 20 minutes. Most everything else is very quick hit, like text and done. Call here's the number, call them, they'll fix it, and away the tenant goes. But when my handyman calls and wants to talk about every other day, that's what gets a little bit time consuming.
Got to clear your calendar.
But I got to keep him happy. It's part of the deal, right?
What do we say? I think in the South they say, bless their heart.
Yeah.
But no, keeping high quality team members, even if they like to strike up conversations, I'm sure if he does good work, it's worth that 20-minute phone call.
Yeah, it's good conversation too.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, right? Like, you had a 15-year long relationship with this agent. I'm sure you guys know more about each other than just your professional details, right? You really do get to know the people, and you do grow to, at least to some extent, care for each other and support each other. He's supporting your livelihood, you're supporting his. And thinking of these as long-term relationships, in my mind, is the right way to think about it versus this really transactional model.
Yeah, for sure. Offered some free tickets to basketball, like college basketball games in the local area, but I've told him that it's quite a drive, but he's persistent about trying to meet up. So yeah, exactly what you just said.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. This is, that was the end of the formal questions that I had for you. And with this being a live recorded interview on Twitter Spaces, I wanted to make sure we address any questions that anyone has in the room. So I saw Vinod here he's in attendance. I'm not sure if he's able to talk or not, but he did also put his question in the chat. I'm going to read out his question so you can answer it. So have you faced issues when a renter was late in making payment multiple times? And if so, how do you handle it?
Yeah, so I had that issue. Our leases have built in $100 penalty if it isn't paid after the second day of the month. There are times when the tenant will text me and say, I'm going to be late, and this is when I'll send it. But a lot of it's dependent upon your state laws. If it gets really bad, I'll start sending, I can't think of the legal term, but fail to note or
It's like a cure or quit notice.
yep. I'll send them one of those to just light a fire to pay. During COVID, I had one tenant that was struggling quite a bit, and I had quite a bit of leash on letting her not pay just based upon the situation. She was a nurse working many hours, had some family issues going on, and those are the ones that are hard to stay strict with when you're self-managing, because you do have some compassion for problems that other people run into. But I have never had to have an eviction, knock on wood. I think earlier you had mentioned about the one move out that was a disaster. The tenant had used a lot of cooking grease in the home and had to pretty much repaint the whole dining, kitchen, living area and replace all the appliances. But that the tenant was never late with payments. But yeah, I guess in general, just follow your state guidelines for notice and have late penalties built into your leases. If they're really bad, you can, what they sometimes say, pay for keys, or you offer them a certain amount of money to move out and state that if you don't, then we're probably going to go the more unpleasant route.
Yeah, the truth is evictions are a bad thing on both sides, right? It's super expensive for the landlord. It's usually very contentious. And for the tenant's perspective, you're essentially filing something that's laying claim to not only the missed rent, but potentially any damages that occur, and it goes on their record. They're technically required to disclose that when they're seeking future places to live. It's not something they want to go through either. So it's in everyone's best interest to find a solution. So you brought up one good thing I want to click into, which is compassion, right? Like landlords get a bad rap. I think it's highly generalized, but a lot of people think of landlords as these evil, I don't know, almost heartless entities that just extract rent and fees and all that from working class individuals. I think that's pretty far from the truth for someone like yourself. And I'd like to think for myself too, is there is a fine line between having compassion and being flexible in a true time of hardship and just bending the rules too far and getting taken advantage of. So what would you credit to being able to toe that line and not be too flexible, but be just flexible enough? Like how have you approached that for the years?
Yeah, being highly responsive is, I think, huge to the tenant. Typically, if there's any issues at the house related to HVAC or plumbing or any of that, it's addressed in 24 hours. And I think that's one thing that's key. And then listening to the tenant as far as things that are important to them. Example, I have someone that's going to be moving into one of our places, and I'm getting ready to paint the interior of the house, and I've offered her, what color would you like it? I typically paint this color, but since you're moving in, would you like this? And then she's asked about the carpet, whether it'd be replaced. I guess the long story short is just listening and treating them as an individual versus just maybe a check in the mail of that some landlords or third-party companies may see the tenant as. I think as a remote and even a hands-on property manager owner, you get to be more flexible. And when I view myself as a manager and an owner, I think about the money that I'd be saving if I were to hire a property manager, and I feel like I can put that much money back into the homes without even sweating, because that would have been money lost anyway. So if I'm able to improve the homes with that 10% that I would have probably paid somebody else, I feel it's a win for all.
Totally agree. And I hope one of the takeaways people have from listening to this is that you don't have to default to hiring a third-party property manager, even if your properties are in a different area than where you live. I know you said you live, within driving distance, but if you haven't been to some of the houses in 4 to 5 years, it wouldn't matter if it was within driving distance or if it was a 5-hour flight away, right? You've built systems that are durable enough that you don't have to be physically present. in order to keep the rentals, not only keep the rent checks coming and keep the houses occupied, but take care of the tenants, build a relationship with them, and have them trust that you're paying attention, even though you don't live in the same market. So that's my big takeaway from this conversation. It's congruent with my experience too, which is you can do this from afar. And that's just about being methodical and building a system and sticking to it.
Yeah, honestly, when I was 10 minutes away, I was running the same systems and I was seeing the homes just as little. So the systems never changed. It was just, we moved a few times and the system was built so that it could run.
Yeah, I always joke, and I don't even know if it's a joke, but even if I was managing a rental that I own that was right next door to me, like I don't do most of the handiwork myself. I usually still outsource it. So I'm not sure what difference it would make to me if it was next door versus 3 states away. And that's just me. Some other people are a lot more hands-on, but either way, the bottom line is it can be done. We're right at the hour mark. You've been very generous with your time. Some amazing stories there. We'll have to do it again sometime. But are there any other last words you want to leave for someone who might be looking to build something similar to what you've done?
I would just say make sure the numbers work out, and the remote landlord avenue is just about building good relationships. And once you find good individuals that are boots on the ground, and compensate them well and make sure that they treat everyone well.
Amen to that. Joe, it's been a pleasure getting to know you a bit better. I know we've interfaced quite a bit online. That's another final point I want to punctuate is Joe and I connected just by messaging each other in DMs here on Twitter. And you can meet a lot of amazing people and gain a lot of good perspective and just grow your network simply by being willing to reach out to people. So I'm glad that we struck up this conversation and had this space, and I look forward to doing it again someday soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.